Okay, so today we are going to be talking about The Well of Ascension, which is the second book in the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Uh, if you haven't checked out my first review, The Final Empire is the first book in the series. I've already reviewed that book. Definitely recommend it. It's one of the books. It's actually used to be my go-to book to recommend to new fantasy readers. That has since been replaced by Cradle because I think Cradle is just a much better beginner and like intro book into fantasy, whereas Mistborn is still great. Don't get me wrong, still an amazing book. Um, but it's a little bit longer, and that can sometimes put people off because a lot of people don't have a lot of time to work with. So, the Well of Ascension, just a premise basically, takes place almost right after the events of the previous book, kind of like a year into like a year-ish span of after the book, and it's basically Vin and Ellen, primarily Ellen and like the crew, trying to reestablish a government and like implement Ellen's ideas while like trying to push off the chaos that is coming because they can only hold so much of the kingdom due to like they only were in the capital, so they only have like so much power and strength to work with, and so they have to deal with things like rival warlords, including Ellen's father, and the consequences that are dealt with when building, after overthrowing a government, rebuilding a government to take its place. Um, I really like this idea and concept. This is definitely one of my biggest pros for the book because a lot of fantasy series we don't get to see what happens after they defeat the evil Dark Lord, right? It's just you read up until that point and then they're like, "Cool, we're done. We did it. We overthrew him." But like there are challenges after that. And I really like how Brandon does this like building of this world and development of, yeah, there are problems with implementing a government and also like implementing it with this crew of thieves and Ellen at the center, who's kind of an idealist and kind of not necessarily poking holes but like pointing out that there are a lot of struggles with, you can have good ideas, but sometimes you need to be a little bit more, that being an idealist and being a great leader are not the same thing. And I think that's really cool. This book is a lot of like Ellen character development. Like Vin gets a little bit more. Um, I really like her like diving into new metals and figuring out like new ways to combine things and work with different things and developing her powers be more to be more, I guess is just the best way I can put it. But I would say this book is primarily focused on Ellen and his journey of being finally getting his dream and being a ruler and trying to help the people and realizing that like sometimes you have to maybe his father's way isn't right, but there are things that he does that are the reason that he maintains power. So that is super cool. Tyndall is one of the new characters. She's a terrace woman. And I really like her character a lot. I really thought she was super interesting. And I mean, Sazed is probably my favorite character from this series. So I think his culture is fascinating and I love just him and his personality. So those are my big positives of this book. The last book, The Final Empire, I didn't really critique a whole lot because there really isn't much to critique in that book. That book is just a fantastically written. If that was just a one-off book, I would say that's probably one of the most like well-written worlds I've seen. But since it's part of a trilogy, there's different problems that come up. But that book is fantastic. I think it's super, super well written. The characters are all super interesting, well developed, fleshed out. The world building's excellent. The conflict, all the, problems that come up are great. This book is not nearly as clean. But that being said, I do think you should still read it, and I'm gonna go into spoilers when I talk about critiques, because there's just absolutely no way I can avoid not spoiling stuff when I critique things like this. I have to get too much into details and talk about those. So if you don't want anything spoiled, see you later. For those of you who don't care or who have already read the book, let's talk about some critiques for this book. My first thing I'm going to bring up is the deaths. This is not my first time reading this book. I have read this series this is probably my third or fourth time reading through it. So I knew these were coming. I just kind of forgot how anticlimactic they were. We lose Doxson, Clubs, and Tyndall. And those three characters are huge characters. I mean, they're technically side characters, but those deaths still impact our characters a lot, and they're all off-screen deaths. They're not. We don't get to see them. We don't get to see anything of what their final thoughts are, what they're doing, and I think that would be okay maybe for one of them, but for three of them, it just felt kind of like, okay, I need to clean the board a little bit, and I don't want to, or it could have been a thing of, I don't want to have these very cliche final moments of these final thoughts and stuff like that. I want to avoid that, so I'm just not going to even do it. I think that's a huge missed opportunity, because we could have gotten a ton of emotional impact in those moments. And the fact that we get almost none, I think Clubs would have been the one that I would have been the most okay with not having as a scene, but I think the other two you need to have as a scene. At least Tyndall, I would say, for sure, because she's just introduced into this book and she's very important to Sazed, and the impact of her death changes him fundamentally. So I think if it would have been a scene with them both together, or we could have at least seen her final moments, I think that could have really made the story more impactful. And part of it too, I think, is that this kind of leads into this critique, which is, I think this book is trying to do too many things. It's got the whole political struggle is the main central focus of this book, but there's also the mystical aspect of what's going on, the deepness and how the Lord Ruler was integral in that, what happened 1,000 years ago, why did he take this power, what's going on, and that's Vin's part of the story. I mean, I personally think the best part of the story is the political struggle and resettling this up, and the mystical part's just kind of thrown in there, and it's brief, it's talked about throughout the book, but it's not huge. The main problem is what's going on between Elend and his father and other warlords and the council, and there's all these things going on. But because we have both of those things, you could see Sanderson wanted to conclude them both in this book, which I think was a mistake. I think you set up the mystical stuff for book 3, which technically kind of happens, but you don't conclude anything really here. You could have started off, we get into, this struggle with this Koloss army and the people really trying hard to hold on and stuff like that, and Vin comes in and saves the day, realizes that there's a way that she can take control and run this army, and that would have, I think, been more interesting to spend more time and make that the conclusion of the book of them struggling to set up this government, and maybe we get the part where Elend with Vin kind of pushing him a little into it, of being yeah, he's your emperor now, so we're done with this, we're not doing this anymore, you disobey, I'm gonna kill you because I'm really sick and tired of this, which is very Vin-like to do. She kind of accepts, she's the assassin and like bodyguard to Ellen. So I really, I really enjoy that, and I think that could have easily been the book, and spent more time on like that and a little bit of what happens after, and a little bit more on the battle, maybe with a couple of like these big character deaths that we were talking about. And then the mystical elements could be just hinted at and hinted at and hinted at. And then at the beginning of 3, or even at the very, very end of this book, you just sprinkle in the Well of Ascension, and Vin, releases Ruin. And that's just how it ends. And we get to see the consequences of that moving forward, like in an epilogue or something like that. But we don't get to see that. And I think my biggest issue with the Well of Ascension little conclusion part, that's the actual conclusion of this book, is it feels very forced. Like I feel like they kind of have to rush through getting to the Well of Ascension. Like, oh wow, it's been here the whole time, because because it has been, and we haven't been able to find it because of X reason. And then like the mists are like talking, and the mist, which is supposed to be preservation, stabs Ellen and basically kills him, or tries to kill him. And they did it so that Vin would heal Ellen. But why don't you instead have, some other, I don't know, I just feel like the motivator for like, okay, I am a shard, I'm gonna stab this man to make sure that the power, or that this entity Ruin does not escape, and I'm gonna do that by stabbing this man, and that's gonna be how it's gonna go. Why wouldn't it just be like, wouldn't it have been more interesting to be throughout the book to have these very contradicting hints? I know we got some, but like more that Vin was like putting pieces together and nothing made sense, and so she was super confused and didn't know how to use this power, and ended up releasing Ruin anyway by what she did. I just feel like this, like the stabbing of Ellen and then making him into a Mistborn, it just does not feel, I guess in my opinion, it doesn't feel like a legitimate reason. It took me out of the story quite a bit. And I think that part of it has to do with the stabbing. It just doesn't feel like, why would you do that? It doesn't make any sense. Especially if you're trying, like, you want these people to help you, so you stab someone? I don't know. And then the other thing is, like, Ellen becoming an Allomancer, becoming a Mistborn, which is, Vin's thing. In theory, I get it, but in practice, it just felt very like, here you go. There was no like build up to it. There's no foreshadowing to it. It was just like, boom, you're an Allomancer now by using this thing. There was no like journey to become a Mistborn. And it also, I feel like, takes away a little bit from Vin, because she is like the Mistborn after Kelsier died. So I don't know. That's just my personal opinion on that. I think it's my biggest problem with that book specifically. But I'm still gonna read the Hero of Ages again because I like the series a lot. Even with my critiques of it, it's still a good series. It's definitely weakened by these, but it's not anywhere like, it's definitely not anywhere near bad. It's just these things, I feel like these are the type of things that like you can tell that this was an early series that Sanderson wrote. Like it's one of his earliest things he did. So that's going to be it for this one, everyone. I will be reading the next book, and I got a couple other series to finish up too and review, see how those end. I'm really excited about that. So If you agree or disagree with me, post comments down below. I know a ton of people who've read this. I like talking about this book a lot. I think Sanderson's an excellent writer, probably the best fantasy writer of like modern day. We can fight about that too, or talk about it. Like the video if you do like it, and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.